when I think about innovation, I think about people who are pushing the envelope, who are doing things that are different, who are doing things that might be like that people haven't seen before. And so I think honestly, if you're a founder who is following Jesus, who is, trying to put yourself in that mindset of like, this isn't my own kingdom, that you're going to be thinking about problems and things that in a completely different way from most other people.
Faithfulness is at the core of me being a founder.
Good business values and ethics come from the Bible.
Lead with your relationship with Christ. Lead with your knowledge of the gospel.
One of the metaphors that I always love to use is that, it's like a campfire, right? In the middle is a fire, and that surrounds the campfire are these rocks. And as the fire burns, those rocks get hotter and hotter, right? Like, though they become to the point where you can't pick them up. Well, the gospel of Jesus Christ should be the fire. And then those rocks should be the things that are the facets of your life, right? Like for me, it's fatherhood, it's being a husband, it's being an entrepreneur, being a podcast host, right? It's being a member of my church community, a broader member of my, the actual community that I live in.
Yeah.
All of those things are heated by my discipleship, my relationship with Christ, right? So too many people compartmentalize their faith and don't let it shine through in the things that matter. Like, you should let your faith shine through in your business. You should let your faith shine through in if you're a husband or a father, especially in those places,
Yeah. Yeah, dude. That's a great concept. And I know like you're obviously just getting this thing off the ground. It sounds like we're recording a couple
Yeah,
episodes. And then, what? So obviously you have your own business that you're running right now
that's correct.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like with that, I mean, man, I might just end up interviewing you by accident, but
I
no.
think we're good. I'm good with we're already recording. So yeah, let's flow.
Yeah,
Go for
whatever.
it.
Yeah. So like I'm interested to figure out how you got this idea of doing the podcast in the first place, right? So it's like it sounds like you're taking that approach with your own business, right?
Oh yeah,
And
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did you just end up saying like, "Hey, I feel like I'm the only guy that is taking this seriously and I want to talk to other people," or like I just don't get a lot of examples of that? Was that kind of the idea behind it, is just saying,
Well, the original idea of the podcast was to have myself and my co-founders on and talking about life as a startup. We're in the tech software, specifically SaaS space, right? But in the
yeah.
tech space more broadly, and talking about what it is to be a tech founder through the Christian perspective, right? Because we just hadn't seen it, right? And especially in the early startup stages, it was the concept came because it's like I would want to listen to a podcast like that. I don't know what
Mhm.
I'm doing. I do know that I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ, or at least I try to be, right? And I do know that I definitely have a company now and we're running that,
Yeah.
and it's just like it would be nice to listen to somebody in my seat. And so that was the light bulb was like, well, let's do that for other people.
Hmm.
Let's make sure that we can let other people know like it not only is it okay, but you're called to lead with your discipleship and your entrepreneurship, right? Like you're
Yeah.
called to
Yeah.
do that. And here we are doing that. I brought the idea, we brought on Aloha with Nation and to handle like our PR and do things more broadly. And I ended up bringing up the podcast idea with them and we kind of ran with it and Nation talked about having on, guests like yourself that are Christians in entrepreneurs and having these conversations so that we can shine a light to the community more broadly. I want to see more founders that lead with their Christian faith, right? So that's kind of long story short,
Yeah.
that's what it looks like. But yeah.
No, that I eat that kind of stuff up. Honestly, like there's so few resources out there. It's kind of mind-boggling,
Yeah.
to be honest, right?
Yeah.
I think the only other, there's this what I would call it is like it's sort of like an incubator for like Christian faith-based founders. It's called Praxis Labs.
Yeah. I've heard of
And
Praxis.
Praxis, yeah. And that has honestly been the single resource that I've visited and said there's actually stuff there that is like could meaningfully impact how I structure my day-to-day life as someone
Mhm.
who owns and runs a business. And so anyway, that's all to say that I think that this is really valuable.
Thanks, man.
Like I think these conversations are really good. I love to talk with other people who are in this space because I don't know if you've felt this way, but as someone sitting in like a leadership seat, especially when you're the person running or you're the founder or whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
most of the people I talk to on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily have the understanding or empathy, or they just don't have the same experience. I can't be like, hey, when you feel like all the problems roll up to you and you're just dealing with all this,
yeah,
all these problems,
100%.
or it's like, I know that because you work in a different area, or, this just isn't your life, that you may not totally understand this. And there's not a lot of people. I do meet people, but it's like, it's just only every once in a while where I'm like, you're serious about your faith and you know what it's like to be in a
Yeah.
position where you're in charge of,
It's not a
a company.
common combination. You know what I'm saying? I meet
No.
a lot of people that are
Yeah.
incredibly serious about their faith, right? Like when I go to my church, like, I mean, the person that leads our congregation, man, is a holy man, and his wife's an amazing, woman, but they're not entrepreneurs. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like it's so
Yeah.
it's like it's like the other day I was talking to them. They didn't even know what I did for work, and I was just kind of talking to them about what I do, and they were really interested, but they couldn't relate, right? Just because
Mhm.
I can't relate to leading a congregation, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but to find other people that it's that put their faith first, because that's what we're called to do, right? Like we are called to when we talked about this the other day in that episode that we did, which is to drop our nets. And what does that mean metaphorically? It's like dropping literally everything and following
Mhm.
Christ, right? And I take that very seriously. It doesn't mean I'm perfect at it, right? But it's like we said in the beginning, there's so many people that compartmentalize. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I'm a founder, but the founder thing comes first. And I really separate those things in my life.
Yeah.
I don't let those things intermingle, which I think is a mistake because you can really show people the power of the Christian story and true discipleship if people see like Spencer doesn't shove his faith down our throats. He's not trying to convert us every single time we talk to him, or Jamie's not trying to convert his employees to Christianity. But like, man, those guys like really treat their employees well. Man, those
Mhm.
guys really
Yeah.
treat their customers right. Man, they really like care about doing the ethical thing. Like, why is that? Oh, because they take their Christian faith incredibly
Mhm.
seriously. I don't know if that's how you feel, but that's something that I think is a no-brainer for Christian founders and why we should lead with our faith.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the way that I think about that is sort of like, I have my own little kingdom. And like that's something God has given to me, is like a little kingdom that includes the stuff that's under my area of influence, right? So it's like my like this house that I own is like part of my part of my kingdom.
Yeah.
Like, the car that I have, right? The business that I own is a part of this little kingdom. And it's like God has given that to me to manage. And I have a choice of whether I'm going to put that kingdom under God's kingdom, like bring that into what he's doing, and or not. Right. I
Yeah.
could say, oh, like, yeah, like I have like a faith, but like I'm going to run this thing my own way and I'm not going to let those things intersect. But I think for me, that's where I think about it, is like I do have a choice to bring this little kingdom that I have inside of God's kingdom. And like I think what that means for me is that when I am operating independently, like I'm just running the show myself, then I'm just making whatever decisions I feel like are best.
Yes.
And I'm making unilateral choices. I'm just saying, all right, well, I think this is good, so I'm going to do it. But if I'm under the authority of someone else, like I'm going to make decisions in consideration of what they would do or want to do and what their goals and objectives are. Just like I'm the manager of something, that someone else has given me. So in this case, it would be like I'm trying to think about, in this situation, like what would Jesus do, or like
Yes.
what God is what is he up to in this particular situation,
What
right?
is
Am I
God's
actually
will in this
Yeah.
situation, right? Like, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, not to
100%.
interrupt, but that's yeah.
No, it's exactly right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, just to add to
Yeah.
what you're saying is that's something that I've thought about a lot is like with our company Help Coast, right? We one of the things that we joked about, it was, I say joke, but it became serious, which is we want to bring in what would Jesus do into the corporate environment, right? Like how would
Mhm.
Jesus act in a corporate, in a
Yeah.
corporate environment, for lack of a better term, right? And then what that really boils down to is what is God's will for me in this thing? That's
Mhm.
really what it is. Like, what is God's will for me as a husband, as a father? What is God's will for me as a friend, right? As a man, right? What is God's will for me as an entrepreneur, for a business owner, for, we don't employ anybody yet, but that is the hope, obviously. What is God's will for me as an employer,
Mhm.
I think that is one of the key focuses for any Christian, for any faithful founder, is to find God's will in, like what you said, your kingdom. I use the word stewardship a lot, right? Like that
Yeah.
really rings true for me, is that God has given me this thing to be a steward over, right? And so what is his will for me in my stewardship, right? It sounds like you think very similarly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a constant fight, right? Because I think that there's strong entrepreneurship messages and stories, like
Yeah.
stories out there about like that this thing, is yours and you should just maximize it to get as rich and famous as you possibly can. And or like your success is measured by the profit or, this IPO or how much funding you've raised or, whatever, right? Um, but I think that, yeah, so like that's where stewardship or the rubber hits the road for me, I think a bit because uh when you are stewarding something that someone else owns, then you're like
Yes.
not looking out for your own
Yeah.
stuff anymore,
I
right?
love that, because
Yeah.
what you're saying is like, I don't own, like you called it your kingdom, right? So,
Yeah.
we'll go like my kingdom, I don't own. It's God's kingdom, right? You're saying like, he's given it to me to be a steward over, but at the end of the day, I don't own this, right? We know that all good things come from God, who's the author of all good things, right? It is his
Mhm.
grace that provides the goodness in our lives, right? Strictly through his love for us, right? And so, I mean, to correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what you're saying is that what he's given me, what he's given me, is it matching up to his will for the gift that he has provided,
Yeah,
right?
totally. It's the like the parable of the talents
Highly, yeah.
it's
Love
like
that
basically
parable.
where I'm going with it, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, and that's literally at the end of that parable is like,
Yes.
literally, well done, good and faithful servant. Like, I've given you this and like, look what you've come back with. And so that's like very much, obviously this is the Spencer paraphrase of do not have that in front of me right now. But
You're good.
that's the idea of it, right? Is that
Yeah.
like, that's my perspective is like, I've been given something and I do have, in a sense, it is not mine, but it is the responsibility is mine,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's the same with kids or anything else, right? Like they've been given to me, my kids have been given to me for a while as my responsibility to steward them until they're going to get released. And so it's just sort of like that. I have a responsibility. I take it seriously as if this were mine, but at the end of the day, yeah,
Well, when
I don't
someone gives
make
you
that
an
choice.
expensive gift, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
like you don't want to mess it up, right? Like I have items that have been given me that are like family heirlooms, right? And like they're in my possession, but they don't belong to me. They belong to the
Yeah.
family. And eventually they'll get that passed down to either my son or my daughter, right? So um but when you have that gift, you do everything to protect it, right? You do everything not to
Mhm.
lose it. You do everything to value it and to teach its value to those around you, right? Like when, like my daughter walks in my office and I have some of those family heirlooms in my office, I tell the stories behind that, right?
Yeah.
There's value to this. I want you to see how much I value this because it's been given to me
Yeah.
by something bigger than myself, right? And we
Yeah.
take that to the Christian perspective, like our lives, our very breath, our businesses, our families, everything that you mentioned.
Hmm.
It's just this incredibly valuable thing that number one, I know I fall into the trap of being um maybe not ungrateful, but taking things for granted,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
from what I'm hearing you say is that one of the keys to honoring God and um, to multiply your talents is to take none of that for granted.
Yeah. I think that is the fundamental challenge for me is that I think that probably you and I, and probably a lot of other people listening to this or watching this, know that, oh, you know what? Yeah, I should be, making what I'm doing. Like I should be stewarding my gift better. But I think like the something that I think about often is sort of like, because the that way of thinking is not like that doesn't come naturally. You're not going to fall into that way of thinking. Um,
Hmm.
there's a totally different perspective in most of the world, and it's sort of like the law of gravity for me, where if you're floating around in space untethered to anything, then whatever the largest body is that's near you is going to start to pull you into its orbit. And
Hmm.
so, like the largest body of thinking in the entrepreneurship space is definitely not stewardship or submitting your kingdom to
No,
God,
it's
right?
revenue, right? Like
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, that's the holy grail, right?
it is, right? And like it's just and it's not like it's just literally like this is a law of human nature is that like if you float around without putting any sort of direction, on yourself, like if you're not actively trying to go in a direction, you're just going to get sucked into orbit
Yes.
around this way of thinking. So how I have to think about this is like I need to actually be intentionally setting my direction towards like this upstream way of thinking, which is this isn't my own. This belongs to God. And so how can I build into my day-to-day life these constant reminders? Because it literally is just like I have to
Yeah.
remind myself. Like there has to be habits in my life that remind me of this way of thinking. Because if I take those habits out, like I'm just going to get pulled into orbit. And I've seen it
Yeah.
happen so much. So I think that's
I love that
where
analogy.
that's really where I think the rubber does meet the road
So what
when
are
it
those
comes into
habits
that.
then? Like what are the habits that you find that don't allow you to forget what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think there's simple things like, right now I have like the discipline of trying to like get up in the morning before my kids are up. I have a little closet that's right over. You can't see it, but it's like literally a closet in my office. And so I go in there and I sit down. And it's not like like this is not set up. There's literally like a shelf and there's like my printer right there. I play drums, so it's full of like drum like cymbals and
Nice.
snares and just
Yeah.
all this other stuff, right? So I just like put a pillow on the floor, and I sit, right? It's literally like my prayer closet. And so like
Taking it
that's the moment.
literally.
Yeah, literally, right? Where I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the one place where my kids don't find me instantly when they wake up. Um, so, I'll just sit in there and like journal out, like, here's my cares and concerns for the day. Like, here's the things that I'm thinking about. It's usually like the same three things I'm worried about, usually at
Mhm.
work, right? And then just like set that down, close that in like my journal, like that's metaphorically, this is like time to give that to God, and then just like sit and notice and observe, right? And I
Mhm.
think in those moments, it's kind of like I get to center down. I think that's what the Quakers would call it, like centering down into um like this space of here's where reality is, right? Like
Yeah.
I need to put aside all these things that I'm worried about, right? All the ways I'm like, I'm not meeting my own expectations for this. This person's like, are they upset with me? Or like, this is a situation that I have to deal with, or oh man, I haven't got to this in 2 weeks or something, all that stuff. Move it aside, kind of let myself settle a bit, and then come back to that truth. That hey, you know what? Like God is in charge of the outcomes and I'm not. Like I can contribute to that. So I think that is like that's one practical thing is just like when I have that time in the morning, then and I let things settle, I bring my cares and concerns before God. Like that is super, super helpful. Another thing that I've done is if you talk to me for long enough, you'll figure out that like even though I grew up and I still continue to be in like the non-denominational church space, I really do
Right.
like going to the different to different faith traditions and just pulling out the stuff that I'm like, that's super cool. Like I want to pull that out.
Hmm.
One thing I've pulled from uh like the monks and nuns, right? Of all things, right? Or even like I think Catholics and Anglicans will do this too, but it's the idea of
You're talking about
fixed
like the
hour.
monastic lifestyle, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. The monastic tradition has fixed hour prayer, which
Hmm.
is like you have, if you go to a monastery, it's like 6 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, 3, like the bell rings and everyone just stops what they're doing. Like, if you're writing a letter to someone or whatever, you just like drop the pen when the bell rings and you go to
Hmm.
pray.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea is that like time is not yours, but time is God's. And so anyway, like one thing
Mm.
that I've done, I think especially in times where I'm like, man, I just feel like I'm getting pulled in 1,000 different directions, is just scheduling that time. It's like a reminder on my phone
Yeah,
or a
that's
calendar
huge.
event,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like noon, I'm gonna spend like 15 minutes in prayer, and sort of like that bell rings, like the event in my calendar hits, and I'm like in the
I love
middle of the
that.
workday. It's just
Yeah.
like, you're getting slugged back and forth. You got all this stuff, right? And then all of a sudden it's like that bell rings metaphorically, and I'm like, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Time
It's
isn't my
time to
own.
do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because I used to do this thing on my phone.
Yeah.
I don't know why I stopped doing it. I need to do it. I probably, but I was gratitude reminders. I would do three a day. So
Yeah.
like 8 a.m., 12 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock at night, right? I would have these little alarms that go off, and I would just
Mm,
say three things that I was grateful for, and to kind of do like some breath
yeah.
work, and then go on with about my day. Excuse me. But I love the idea. It's funny because I have this prayer book that has all of these prayers from like the early church fathers and saints recognized in the Eastern Orthodox faith,
Yeah.
and they wrote these prayers down, and they put these in these books so that you can see how these holy men and women, right, like what how they prayed and what they prayed for, and that you can say their prayers along with them, right? And it's funny, you look at throughout these prayer books, and they have morning prayers. There's a ton of those. Then they
Yeah.
have like midday prayers, evening prayers, and they have like prayers for all these different topics and situations, and then miscellaneous. Like one of them just says, "Say this any time of day." Yeah,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
specific prayer, right? And the idea, and I'm like, man, I was just thinking about it this morning. Like, how do I remember to do these? And it's just that simple, like setting a reminder and saying that for the next 20 minutes or whatever, it is not my time, but it's God's time. And what's interesting too is what a lot of non-Christians would say is like, well, you're being subservient, which yes, we're placing ourselves as submissive to the creator, right? Like the creation being
Yeah.
submissive to the creator, but it's not being submissive to our detriment. It's being submissive to our growth. It's being
Yeah.
submissive to our relationship with God reciprocates love. It reciprocates healing. It reciprocates salvation. It reciprocates um what's it called? I guess fixing what is broken, right? Because
Mm,
that's what when you look at like the actual definition of salvation, it means healing. Like salvation is
yeah.
being healed from the natural man to the spiritual being, to be joint
Yeah.
heirs with Christ, right? So, anyways, it's what you said. It's funny because I feel like a dummy. And I'm like, yeah, obviously, set times on my phone to go through these prayers and to give that time to God so that I may be healed, that I may be into that relationship with Him and stop forgetting Him throughout my day.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I think that my experience has been it's a really humbling thing to do, because it's just like when that time comes, it's like I see it and I'm like, but I'm in the middle of like, do you know that I got this email, right? Or someone is like pinging me
Yeah,
on
right.
Slack about this stuff. Or it's like, like there's always 1,000 reasons to do it, right? And so I find it's like it actually really is it's a really tough
Yeah.
test. But I think at the same time, like, yeah, I do see absolutely your point. Like, I think most people, especially if they aren't Christians, would say, like, yeah, that is like subservient or whatever. But I would also say it was like if I had someone who is an employee that was really busy, that had a lot of responsibilities, and there's a lot of things coming at them, and they said, "Hey, I need to just check in with you throughout my day so that I can make sure that I'm doing the most important things, that I know
Hmm.
how you want to like handle these situations to have this moment." Then I would be like, "Yeah, that does make sense." that, that you would want to come and practice and learn how I think and get this advice, and so,
And get a mental
yeah,
break, right? To sit with
yeah,
somebody that you respect, that you know has your best interest in mind, hopefully,
mhm,
right? In this
yeah,
analogy, they do,
yeah,
right? There's a lot of managers that don't, obviously, but in
sure,
this analogy, they do. God's the best manager.
yeah,
And sit and say,
yeah,
I know you want me to be successful. I know you want the best for me. I know you want me to build up, for lack of a better term, this kingdom. So I'm gonna sit with you, have a mental break, get some peace, because like, let's be honest, when you're a founder, when you're, and I'm finding this out, right? Like, I've had the side hustles in the past and done the e-commerce stuff and yada yada, but now I'm like
hmm,
literally running a tech startup, right?
yeah,
And it it's a lot, as you know, as
yeah,
a founder, and you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, right? Like, it's just a lot, and it's exhausting, and it can wear you down, right? And so to be
hmm,
able to take that break and have that moment with God is refreshing. It's a
yeah,
refreshing moment. It's like taking that, you're in the desert and you take that drink of that cold water. It's exactly what you needed for that moment, and you get re-energized, right?
hmm,
It's not just about, I think a lot of times we can fall into the trap of doing the things that we feel like the laws of the gospel, right? The prayer, the fasting, all those things.
yeah,
But all those things were made for the betterment of man. That we should look at those
mm,
things, that I get to have this conversation with the creator. I get to take a break and refresh myself, and to have a moment with him, have a moment with the savior, and and then go about my day in that frame of mind. Because I don't know how you feel. It's like, you wake up, you say your prayers, you do your thing, you do your closet thing, which is
mhm,
awesome. For me, I wake up and I say my prayers, I read some scriptures, right? And then throughout the day, that moment slowly dissipates. It doesn't
mhm,
follow throughout the day. Do you find when you set those reminders and you have those, monastic moments, right, of
yeah,
that, giving that time to God, it kind of resets your mind. Like, you move forward in that
mhm, yeah.
framework again. Is that what you find?
It does. Yeah, it's kind of because it's shocking how quickly
Oh yeah.
you forget. It is just shocking,
Yeah.
literally. And I think it's just it's like a habit of your mind. It just shows me how quickly like my mind gets off track. And so I do find that yeah, it re-centers me. Man, there's an analogy about this. A guy named Dallas Willard wrote about it. And his analogy was like that this idea of your mind like drifting away from God is just a habit and it's not like a law of gravity. And with time and
Mm,
training, you can train your mind to keep returning to God like the needle of a compass returns to the north, right?
mm,
It's just, and so you can just like, and that's, I think,
yeah.
what these things are designed to do. It's not like, oh, I need to do this because this is a spiritual checklist item that I need to do, but more like, this is a this is training that is changing the kind of
Yes.
person that I am, right? So like if I'm like I think about it like if I'm the kind of person like let's say I want to run a marathon, right? Like I do
I don't know
firmly
why you
believe
would want to do
yeah, like to be clear, I don't, yeah, I
that.
run sometimes not because I like it, but because,
Yeah.
it enables me to do other things,
My
which is
co-founder is running a
right.
marathon on Sunday, actually, which is fun. His first one. So I was like, if I don't hear from you in a couple of days, I'll know something bad happened,
Right, yeah, by the side of the road. Uh, but it's like if I wanted to run a marathon, like I do believe that like I mean right now I could absolutely I can't run a marathon. Like that's not within my capacity to do. I do believe that like yes, if someone laid hands on me and I was empowered by the Holy Spirit, like I could run a marathon and then some, right? But if I want to become the kind of person who can consistently run a marathon, or in more spiritual terms, like if I want to be the kind of person who can consistently love difficult people, if I can be the kind of person who's consistently making decisions and trying to align with the will of God, then I need to consistently train to become the kind of person who's capable of doing that. And so I think when it comes to whether it's like spending time in prayer or this fixed hour thing or spending time silence, Bible reading, whatever, it's not just like, oh, I'm supposed to do this because my pastor told me, or
Yeah.
this, but it's like I'm doing this because I know that just by putting myself through this training, I'm going to become the kind of person who's capable of doing the things that Jesus actually did.
Mm,
Um, and like that I actually can become the kind of person who's not bent out of shape when something goes wrong in my business.
yeah.
And I can become the kind of person who can treat a difficult client with love and with compassion. I can be the kind of person who's not motivated by greed. All these things, right? But it's like I'm not
Yeah.
there yet, but there are things that I can do that are just like they're indexing me, kind of like that needle of the like I'm gotta train that needle of the compass to go where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that I think about it. And
That's really
it works.
insightful
Yeah.
because all those things are for the betterment of your soul, but they
Hmm.
also they better your business, right? Because
Yeah.
they make you a
Yeah.
better founder. They make like loving difficult clients, right? Doing the right thing by them. That's
Yeah.
only going to serve your business. And so I find
Yeah.
isn't it so interesting that the things that the Lord tells, commands us to do,
Hmm.
instructs us to do, right? Not only improve our soul, not improve our being, but they improve our lives even in what would the outside world would deem the secular things
Yeah.
of owning a business, of taking care of clients, right? Of being a friend or whatever it may be. The tenets of the gospel improve you in every facet. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and a quote really stuck with me. Actually, I'm a whiteboard guy, as I see
Yeah.
you are. I have a whiteboard in my office, and I
Yeah.
wrote on the whiteboard, and they were talking about the practices of Christianity. And the guest said, I can't even remember the show now. I'm spacing it, but the guest said, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it matters who you're becoming. And that's what
Yeah.
you're
Hmm.
talking about.
Yeah.
You're not
Totally.
doing things, you're becoming somebody through the grace and power of God and through the healing power of Jesus Christ, right? Through what he did on the cross. Like it is only possible through him to become those things. And that's what you're doing when you talk about those practices.
Oh yeah, that is 100% my frame of mind. And it's taken a long time, right? From getting out of that mindset of like I just need to do this because this is the right thing to do or I feel obligated to do that, right? But to
Hmm.
just sort of ask myself, yeah, what kind of person am I becoming, right? As a result of the habits in my life. And I think that is kind of the fundamental question. Um,
Yeah. If you ask
yeah,
every day, who am I becoming? Like
yeah,
that's a pretty, I mean, that's not an easy question to answer, right? Like, that's a really difficult. I don't know who
yeah.
you would need to take some serious time and more than likely serious time in prayer, asking the Lord who, because he knows better than obviously we do. He's
Yeah.
omniscient, and saying, who am I becoming, Lord? Show me who I'm becoming. Am I on the path that you would deem for me to be, right?
Yeah.
That's a question because it also answers the question, what kind of founder are you? What
Hmm.
kind of husband are you? What kind of father are you? Because if you put your discipleship, like I talked about in the beginning, as like the middle of that campfire or, the gravitational pull, like
Hmm.
what's pulling you? What's that object pulling you into its orbit, right? If that's at the center, then you're on the right path in all those other facets.
Hmm.
All
Yeah.
those other parts of your identity, you are on the correct path if you're on the correct path of discipleship, right? Yeah, man, that's really insightful. Like I had never thought about it that way, but you
Yeah.
said really, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And it's like it's funny too because when I started asking myself that question, I didn't always get answers that I liked, right?
yeah, imagine.
Like,
What do you mean
finally I was
about sinner?
yeah, you're like, I mean, I've been doing my own thing, yeah, right, for like 10 years, and which is nuts to me. That's crazy. But
How old are
when
you
I
now?
look at
If you don't
what
mind
was
me
that?
asking. How old are you now? If you don't mind me asking.
35.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So I started this in my
Yeah,
20s,
yeah,
and I kind of built it up from there. And so yeah, it's been 10 years of running my own it's a digital agency that I
yeah.
have.
We'll get into
Um
that. I definitely want to talk about specifically what you're doing. Yeah,
yeah, well, happy to talk about it. But yeah, it's been 10 years of doing that and I've noticed that if I, like the some of the answers that I didn't like when I started asking myself, who have I been becoming over these last couple years, right, of being an entrepreneur, is saying like I feel like I've uh been striving harder and harder and harder and pushing myself more and more and more and being less and less gracious with myself
mm,
over time. And I kind of feel more hardened. I feel like, we sometimes you meet these like battle hardened executives that have been,
yeah,
in the C-suite for 40 years and they're just like they have a permanent scowl attached to their face. And I
yeah.
kind of went, I feel like if I'm on this path, in another 30 years, right? Like when I'm 65 and if I'm still doing this, like I think all the wrinkles up here are gonna, I'm gonna get all the wrinkles on my head. Like I'm gonna have the frown and so I had to sort of ask myself, like, what are the habits that are contributing to me not being able to just turn that switch off for a bit, right? And so I had to examine like my habits of rest,
Mm,
sleep, boundaries,
yeah.
around my work,
That's
around client, that kind
you
of
hear
stuff.
so much about like being obsessed and that there is no balance in entrepreneurship, right? And I do fall in being a founder, right? And I
Mhm.
do fall into the camp of like balance probably isn't a thing. I always look at it as like my favorite analogy is like the plate spinning. Like you've been to a circus and they have like the
Yeah.
plates on the sticks and they spin the plates, right? And you're not really balancing. It's just when the plate gets wobbly, you spin that plate, and the next plate gets wobbly, you run to that plate and you spin it.
Yeah.
That's how I view life. It's you're spinning the plate when it gets wobbly. So what do I need to put my focus on essentially is what that analogy is teaching. The one plate that you can't ever let fall and break. There are plates that they will fall and they will break. I think there are two plates that you cannot allow: your relationship with God and your relationship with your family. Those are the two
Mhm.
that should never, ever, they maybe get wobbly, but they should never fall and break. The other ones can break and they can be mended. And our relationship with God can be mended. You can really mess up your relationship with your family, right? I've
Yeah.
seen it firsthand, right? And so, I don't even know where I was going with that. Yeah. Now dude, I get on so many tangents, man. My ADHD kicks in hard. But anyways, you're talking about in a world where it's like there's only the one thing. It's only
Yeah.
success. It is
Mhm.
only the monetary value. It's only, being wealthy and rich and all those things. And look, like one of the reasons I started our company is like, yeah, I want to make good money. Like I'm not going to hide
Sure.
that
Yeah.
fact. You know what I'm saying? But for you, I think a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of founders outside of our mode of thinking would say, well, you just don't want it bad enough then. You know what I'm saying? Because
Mhm.
like you need to give your all yourself to this thing if you really want to be the
Yeah.
billionaire or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Totally. I think that, yeah. Yeah. That mindset
It's just it's an
is,
Instagram
yeah,
mindset, right? Like you see it all the time on social media,
it is. Yeah. Man, I think you know, for me, like the thing that comes to mind is that, just like in Exodus, right? There's like, Pharaoh and slavery and like God
Mhm.
rescuing his people out of this slavery, right? I think that like the spirit of Pharaoh just doesn't live in Exodus. The spirit of Pharaoh is alive and well today, right?
Mhm.
Which says you can't take a break. You have to produce. There is no rest, right? And
The hustle culture,
right,
right?
hustle culture, 100%. And it's like for me, the question is how much is enough, right? What is enough? And I think I had to come to this place of saying, you know what? Like I have more than enough, right? What does it look like to live a godly life full of contentment, right? What does contentment look like in my life? Um, and actually having to realize that I don't think there's anything wrong with having more money. Like I strive to increase revenue in my company. I
Of course.
strive to increase profitability.
Yes.
And like,
You're
listen,
being
I
a
could,
good steward of what you have, right? You're multiplying the
yeah,
talents by doing so. Yeah, we're not saying do the opposite of that by any means.
100%. Yeah. And I don't think there's a sense of like coasting or like, I don't care about those things, but those things are not determining my level of happiness in life.
Mm,
I'm not that my happiness in life is not contingent on how much money I make.
mm,
And because I have decided, it really is a decision. It honestly is a decision of saying, if I did not make a penny more than I do right now, it would be enough. If I made less, I would be fine, right? Because I think that there's it's such a trap to get into to say, I just need like I'm going to only be happy if I reach this certain status, billionaire, whatever, right? And I think that's what really drives so much of that hustle culture, that idea that I can't switch is that either I need more money or that in order to be liked and respected and accepted, I need to achieve a certain level of status.
Yeah. There's a
And
lot of
yeah,
depressed millionaires out there.
totally.
You know what I'm
Totally.
saying? I mean, you see, I mean,
Yeah.
I hate, it's sad, but you see really wealthy people killing themselves. Like
Yeah.
quite, I mean, like, look, there's plenty of people that aren't wealthy doing that. You know, I think there is a epidemic of lack of purpose and lack of identity and lack of self-value. And I think that's directly correlated to the society's decrease in lack of faith and lack of
Hmm.
relationship with God. I really do. But to go back to it's there's even studies that say I can't remember the exact number. Let's say it's 160 for this. It's somewhere around there. It's like 130, 160. After a certain amount,
Hmm.
like of yearly, your happiness does not increase.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like, look, I get it. It's I would much rather have money than not have money. Like having money makes life, at least like modern life, 10 times easier because you can get the groceries, you can go to the gas pump, right? You don't have to worry about your kids
Yeah.
getting a meal, right? Like I'm not saying that. We both understand that, right? But if your happiness is directly tied to what your net worth is,
Hmm.
you need to reevaluate your life pretty drastically. You know,
Yeah.
like and I've been there, dude. Like, I mean, in my early 20s, man, I was like, I need to produce, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was
Hmm.
all on my career. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to, like, I was like, I'm gonna go and be the VP of sales for this company. I'm gonna do whatever it
Yeah.
takes, yada, yada. And I was miserable, dude. I was miserable,
Yeah.
man. You know what I'm saying? I was just overworked. I was tired. I was underappreciated and I didn't like myself. I was out of shape. You know what I'm saying? Like none of
Yeah.
those things. It was only when I met my wife, and I'm dating her and I'm like, oh, this is really nice. Oh, like going to church with her is nice. Oh, like
Yeah.
building this relationship with somebody that I really care about is important. And then you take that to an infinite scale with the ultimate being that loves us, who is God.
Yeah.
How much more beneficial is that? How much more enlightening is that? How much more weight is lifted when we build that
Hmm.
kind of relationship with the Lord, you know? So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah, it is. That has, speaking of orbits or campfire analogy or whatever, right?
we got to
Like,
find more analogies.
yeah, right. All this thing. Yeah. It's just like that way of thinking, the hustle culture, all like
Yeah.
that is, yeah, like that is one of the most, it's the easiest thing for me to slip into by far,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's that
I think it's
like,
natural for
yeah,
founders to do that, right?
oh,
Because
totally.
it's
Yeah.
you have to hustle to be a founder. I'm not saying don't hustle, right? But there's the
Yeah.
hustle culture, which is a different ideology, right?
Yeah. 100%, which is like, that's like, you just have to do anything to succeed. And if you're not willing to do anything, then what is your worth? Right?
Mm,
What is are
mm.
you really worth anything? And so that's the up or out.
They're saying
Yeah.
that people tie their identity into that hustle. Like
Yeah.
their value is directly correlated to, well, how much am I willing to give and do for this?
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's it. Because if they fail in business, then they fail in life. Right. And I felt that way, right? Like if my business fails, then I am a failure, right? What am I worth if I am not an owner of a business or I'm not successful in this way, right? And so it's been a journey of just realizing, you know what, like the business could fail at some point, and I have a lot of friends who love and respect me who are not going to see me any differently. If I made less money, I also have friends who just don't really care about it, right? And so I'm certainly like literally part of it might be like I'm also now hanging out with different kinds of people, right? If I'm hanging out with people who are status obsessed and don't hold the same
Mhm.
values and are just, evaluating me based on social signals and all these things, like that's very different because yeah, if I do fail, like all of those relationships crumble. But I think that is the cool thing about being a part of like a solid church community with friends who are in life with you because they like you as a person and they're invested in you as a person, not just for
And they
what
don't
you
care
bring.
what you do, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like I said, I was talking about the individual that leads our congregation, and yeah, and he's just like he took interest in what I did because he cares
Hmm.
about me, but it didn't. And he was asking me lots of questions because, we're an AI based company, which is very, the hot topic right now for sure,
Yeah.
but it didn't change his perception of me. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, that's
Yeah.
just it's what he does. It's not who he is. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's,
Yeah.
what you do with Brooks Digital. That's what you do. It's not who you are.
Yeah.
Right. And to the founders out there, I think that's a really important, because I fell into that a lot because I wanted to be a founder since I was a sophomore in college, dude. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Right.
Yeah.
And I had done the little thing, I'd done little things. I said side hustles and stuff, but just wasn't ready for that moment. I started, help goes to 30. I'm 31 now, right?
Uh,
So, it took me a lot, longer than I thought it would, right? But I think one of the lessons I learned along the way, one of the things that, the Lord probably wanted me to know was you are doing this thing, you are not this thing, right?
mhm.
It doesn't, I don't care. The Lord cares if, he wants us to be successful. He wants us to enjoy our lives and be full of joy and amongst the hardships that we will all inevitably, experience, right? But like the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like it's cool that we get to do this. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
cool that we get to build something that we enjoy and actually get to do something with our lives while we're here that we enjoy doing, right? But at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter, man. It really doesn't. And I
Yeah.
think when you take that pressure off yourself and say, what I am as a child of God, what I am is a divine creation, that if I so choose to join Christ and be joint heirs with him, right? What I am as a husband and father, who I am is Jamie Cain, right? Like
Hmm.
that's like that is who I am,
Yeah.
and being a founder is a part of what I do. And I take pride in that. And I'm happy about that. And I am grateful for that. And I'm a steward over everything that has been given to me. But I will not let it definitively define who I am as a person. Right? I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah, totally. I think that the funny thing is when you can get to that place, then it actually has a positive impact on your work, right?
yeah, man.
Because
Yeah.
I think, well, one of the things, just to like pull out a more concrete benefit of that, is that when I'm not super tied up in this business has to succeed or make this much
Mhm.
money because I need it to, is then when I'm working with my team, as an example, I can show up as this non-anxious presence
Yes.
with
Yes.
them,
Totally.
right? Where I'm not like suddenly feeling like I need to drive them hard because I need to see a certain result for myself, right? And that all that trickles down. So when they can come to me and they can be in my presence, and
Mhm.
sometimes like I'm going to be the only Bible they ever read in a way, right? Where if
Yeah.
like,
Right.
they're
Yeah.
not going to know who God is, they're not going to know who Jesus is or what he's like,
Yeah.
except through like just sitting in a room with me. And
Yeah.
then they're like,
Yeah, they shall know you. They shall know me through you, right? Like that is a biblical teaching. Yeah, 100%.
100%. Yeah. Like that. I think about like the fragrance of Christ, right? Like
Hmm.
sitting in the room, like, and so like being there and being able to sit and not like feeling like I need to pressure someone or demand results. Like I can be honest and say, hey, like I don't think we're doing really well here. And if we don't change this, then this is going to be the consequence. And I don't think either of us want this to
Hmm.
happen. Right. It doesn't mean that I'm permissive or that I'm not willing to address issues or ask for results.
Yeah.
But I think the way in which I show up changes when when I don't feel like my entire sense of self-worth
So,
depends on winning.
do you feel like, and that's because, like, if your entire identity is wrapped up into being a founder, right? Your entire identity is being like, and if I fail at this, then that means I'm a failure. I'm worthless. I
Yeah.
don't matter because the business doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
It. I don't know how you operate that way. It's like being an employee and knowing that like your manager or your boss is ruling over with an iron fist. That if you get one thing wrong, you're going to be fired. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're
Yeah.
walking on eggshells all the time, right? There's no way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked for businesses like that where it's, you're just 1 month away, you're one missed quota away from PIP,
Yeah.
right? And it's just like, how do you go out and perform like that? Especially in a job like sales where you feel all that pressure. No one wants to buy from a desperate salesperson. They can smell a
No.
desperate salesperson from a mile
Yeah.
away, right? And it's the same thing with a founder. if your entire identity, your self-worth is wrapped in this, how much more pressure and angst and like weight do you feel? Where if your
Yeah.
identity is where it's supposed to be, which is, we were having this conversation with Nation, my producer. I can call you that, right? Yeah, totally. That sounds so cool, my producer. But we were having a conversation off air, and we were talking about how, essentially, well, shoot, now see, I lost my train of thought again. That happens all. What were we talking about? What was I just saying? Can you remind me? You don't remember? You don't know. Yeah. Anyways, it'll come back to me. But anyways, going back to the self-worth thing, like it's all pent up. You feel this weight, and then you take that off yourself. How much better do you perform because you don't feel as like I have to do this. No, I get to do this. I have this opportunity, and I'm grateful for it. Not that now I'm not scared to lose it, right? I'm
Yeah.
excited to multiply it, right? It's such a different framework. So yeah, I'm going off on a tangent now, but yeah, you get what I'm
No.
saying.
No, you're totally good, man. Yeah, I think that's been an unexpected blessing. And like the thing is, when you're running your own business, you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, or whatever, there's so many things that are on your plate. Like my to-do list is always
Yeah.
bigger than the time that I have. And it's just this constant struggle. There's weight, there's sometimes you have issues with your staff, sometimes you have issues with sales, sometimes you have issues with we have too like sales are too much. How are we going to meet demand? Like it's just like I've realized over time there is never like there's always just something that you're running to, right? It's like
Yeah.
yeah, right. It just at least in my world,
It's a
it's like
treadmill, right? It just never
yeah,
ends. There's no
you're just
end
on a
to it.
treadmill. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just sort of like it's the whack-a-mole thing. You hit like one, hit one mole and another one pops up after that.
There we go. We
Um,
got another analogy. That's
right.
three.
The whack-a-mole. But like all of that is just like the reality of the day-to-day. And I don't know, after doing this for 10 years, it's like and being a dad and being like heavily involved in church and like ministry stuff and like which
Mhm.
themselves, those things are burdens of care just outside
Yes.
of work, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like doing it for that long is, it is like it's a slog to carry all that stuff all the time. And so I found that over time, like if I'm going to actually do this and not just throw my hands up one day and be like, dude, I got to burn this thing into the ground and go, get a job at
Yeah.
Starbucks or something, just like, you know,
Yeah.
schlepping coffees or whatever. Actually, I shouldn't say that. That'd actually be pretty fun. But you know what I mean? Like just some job where like I don't really want to think of, or deal with any problems. I just want to do like
You can be told
something.
what to do,
Yeah,
right?
just
And just
somebody
do
tell
it.
me what to do.
Yeah.
I get bored after like 2 weeks, but
Yeah.
I
I
think
feel
all
that.
that, yeah, it really forced me to examine like how am I carrying myself in the day to day, meaning like am I tying my self-worth to this? Am I resting? Right? Like one of the things that I started doing a
Mm.
couple years ago is taking like a proper 24-hour Sabbath. And I don't think this is like I'm not saying like everyone's got to take a Sabbath because that's like biblically mandated, but it's more of like I feel like that has been a gift where like
Yes.
Friday at 5 p.m., I'm like, dude, signing off Slack, signing off email, like put my phone in do not disturb for 24 hours. Like I don't have any chores around the house. I'm not running errands or whatever. Like
Mhm.
I'm just chilling, with my
Yeah.
family. Sometimes I invite some like friends from church over and we have like a dinner together. I'll like sleep for 10 hours, maybe go on a hike or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Just like hang out with my family, and then like by the end of that, it's just sort of like, okay, cool. Like I'm in a better place, and I've had seasons of business where it's just been like if I hadn't had that weekly Sabbath, like I would have lost my mind. Like, there's just times where I've like the stress has been so high, right? And or there's been such like,
Yeah.
just seasons or like months where it's just been like, man, every week is just a grind, like just a grind. And I know like this is gonna pass, but like what's getting me through this week is knowing that Friday at 5, I'm piecing out. And like I have that 24 hours where I can be like, I come back to it,
Mhm.
And so I don't know. That's been
You're
kind of a
never, and you're never gonna sink your business by respecting the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath,
yeah.
right? And I just don't feel like, oh, I can't, like I'm sure in those times and seasons, you're like, I shouldn't take there had to
Yeah.
be the temptation. I shouldn't take the day off. I should just like, I got to work through the week and I got too much to do. I'm feeling that now, and
Yeah.
anytime I sit down and relax or have a moment with my wife or kids, it's like I almost feel guilty because I should be doing something for the business.
Hmm.
But you're never going to lose out because you take the Sabbath seriously. You keep it holy, right? Like there's a specific reason that God took a day of rest. It wasn't because God needed rest. It was that
Yeah.
he was setting the example for his creation to take that
Yeah.
day, knowing that his creation needed it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really, we've talked a lot about kind of like, I don't know, ethereal things, I guess, for lack of a better term, just kind of like very, philosophical things. But,
Sure.
as far as practical advice goes, I think just to kind of recap, it's, you will have more success when you don't put all of your value and your identity into being a founder, right?
Yeah.
It is what you do. It's not who you do. Taking time to be with the Lord in prayer, in meditation, right, in
Hmm.
contemplation, which I think refreshes you, resets you, recalibrates you, however you want to put that, right? And then also
Yeah.
taking the Sabbath seriously, right? And taking that day of rest for yourself. Is there anything I missed there as far as practicality?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I think it is just about like, yeah, the what like I kind of ask myself, like, those are specific examples that I've incorporated in my life as a result of like the question of who am I becoming and how do I need to change my how I spend my time on a daily and weekly basis in order to become a person who is more loving, who is becoming a person who's kind and becoming more like Jesus, right? And so I think
Yeah.
those and those are always there's very practical answers to all of those things, right? That involve like when am I going to schedule a reminder on my phone to do this thing? And I think yeah, for me absolutely it has been like time in silence and contemplation. I'm generally a more introverted type of person. So like I mean, I love having these conversations, but also like I mean, you don't have to be an introverted person. I think everyone needs to have those times. But anyway, like that's something for me that's helpful, right? The fixed
Yeah.
hour prayer, like Sabbath,
Well,
those have
time
been like,
alone with the Lord is good
yeah,
for, I'm very extroverted, right? But time
yeah,
alone with the Lord is like it recharges the battery, and that's what we
yeah,
want faithful founder to be. I tend to be a more philosophical individual in my
mhm,
conversations with people, but we want this to be practical, right? And it's not just for the audience, it's also for me, right? Like in this new start of
yeah,
my journey, like I want to take these things and apply them to my own life, right? So, but I
yeah.
do want to get into a little bit specifically about, what you do. So, you are the founder of Brooks Digital, which is a digital agency focused on helping nonprofits optimize their online presence. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly right. We do specifically a lot of work with nonprofits that focus on like diseases or disorders or
Okay, I
stuff
see
like
that here.
that.
Okay, health
Um,
nonprofits. Okay,
but like, yeah,
gotcha.
we also do work with nonprofits in general. Yeah, a lot of it is related to their website and their online presence.
Gotcha. How did you get into that?
Yeah, man, I'll try to keep this short. It is a long
Yeah, I
story.
might have asked that at the wrong time.
No, you're good,
At
dude.
the end of the
Yeah, so I kind of backed my way into it is the short and long of it. I started the business in my 20s. At the time, I was basically in bands. Like I mentioned earlier, I played drums. And so I was in like a series of different bands, like either mostly like Christian bands, Christian artists, stuff like that.
any bands we
Uh,
would know?
I think the closest that I could say is that I was in a Christian rock band that was produced by the guitar player from Skillet,
Oh,
right?
that's pretty
So,
sick. Yeah, there you go.
so I was basically in
That's
Skillet.
cool. Yeah,
That's what I always say.
skillet
uh,
adjacent.
right, Skillet adjacent, right? So,
Skillet's
like,
got
I
some
don't know.
jams, man.
That's great. It was great, man. Yeah, it was
That's
actually
super
very
cool.
Skillet-esque.
My barber was he was a guitarist for I'm really into Christian metal, and he was a guitarist in a Christian metal band, and he played with guys like Under Oath isn't a Christian band anymore, but he played like
Yeah,
open for guys like Under Oath and knew the guy, the lead singer from Bless the Fall and stuff like that. So yeah,
yeah,
super cool.
dude.
Anyways, yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's and like that's kind of my space. But anyway, when you're a musician, like you don't make a lot of money. So I'm like, man, what marketable skill do I have other than playing drums that I could use to buy, get $100 to buy food or something? And I was like, well, I went to school for like computer science and stuff like that. So I'm like, I can program websites. So I just kind of started doing freelance work on the side while I was in a band. And then, you fast forward a few years, I got more serious with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And, so I was like, I need a more stable thing that's not having me on the road so much. And so I
Mm,
basically made that decision to like, I need to put my time and energy in growing like this freelance thing, which then kind of got to the point of like, I don't have enough time to service all these clients. So I started, hiring contractors and stuff to help. And then, over time, I decided to continue to niche down. At the beginning, I was just doing that work for anyone. I happened to get a lot of nonprofit clients because like I had connections in the church and ministry space, and there tends to be a lot of people in the church who are working in nonprofits. So I noticed, hey, a lot of the clients that I've been working with are nonprofits, so I'm going to start to focus and market and structure services around them. And then, I have a brother who's disabled.
mm,
And so, he's like, and that's a whole separate story, right? But,
yeah.
he is, like he is in a wheelchair and, like I've been a family member of someone with a rare disease, right? And so I think in particular, I noticed, hey, there's these subsection of nonprofits that focus on helping people with diseases and disorders and stuff like that. With a focus on like, hey, like accessibility is an example, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
one of the services that we provide is like, how can you make your website accessible to those people with disabilities? So I kind of blended, here's my values. Like I kind of had this threefold way of niching down where I was like, what is my story and my experience lending me? Like the story with like, okay, yeah, with my brother, what is my network sending me? Like, what is my background? And then also
Hmm.
just looking at like what very from a business perspective, where are the majority of my clients, right?
Yeah.
And when I sort of triangulated all of these, I'm like, oh yeah, nonprofits in the health space is kind of like the thing that I feel like it's that the prism focused the light onto. So
Yeah.
so anyway, I made that I made that positioning decision a couple of years ago, probably 2020, to really niche down into that. So yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Do you find too? I know for me, it's not like you work your butt off, right, when you're a founder, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and you should and you have to. But I also found um that when I knew that I was doing the right thing, like I felt inspired to start Help Ghost, right? I really a lot of things that came to me just were things I feel very strongly that did not come from my own mind, right? And
Mhm.
then when I started following that path, the doors opened. And like I said,
Yeah.
not that I wasn't working hard, I was, but I've worked hard before and doors haven't opened. We're
Yeah.
working hard, and it wasn't just one door, it was door after door after door after door after door, right?
Mhm.
Did you feel like that with Brooks Digital that you once you like you said to use your word triangulated, right? Where you
Yeah.
were, did the doors open?
Yeah. I think it was I've been in that situation before, by the way, where it's like there have been absolutely times in Brooks Digital where I've like been hammering against a specific door and that hasn't worked. But I will say that yeah, the when I have paid attention to like what is happening in my bit, like not only the question of like what is God doing, but like also what do our clients actually want? Like in business terms, they'd be like, what is the market asking of me? What is the market demand? But I think there's a lot of that of, whenever I feel like I've hit a door that I just can't get open, it's usually because I've been like, I've created it myself, you know? But I think part of it has honestly just been this combination of being observant and trying to listen to say, okay, like here's where I've noticed like the kinds of clients and projects that we've been most successful in helping, that have been the most profitable, that they've been the most happy. And usually all of those things end up, I'm like, these are the same projects, right? The projects where
Mhm.
I end up like, oh, we made a ton of money on this project. The client was insanely happy with the work, right? And I'm like, I would easily do this one again. And it's like, oh, yeah, all of these point to the same type of work. So, And in that sense, yes, that's where it's like I need to just kind of find that path through it.
The
Um,
reason I asked
yeah.
that question specifically, because there's a lot of founders I know for myself, we're like, prospective founders that they know they want to be a founder, they know they want to
Mhm.
launch a startup, but they don't know. Like for me, for a long time, I just knew I just wanted to have a startup. I didn't know where, I didn't
Yeah.
know who I wanted to serve, and that's I guess why I asked that question is I have found. Not that I want to say that I fell into this, but it was my experience through the SaaS industry that led me to the idea of Help Ghost. And then once I felt like, oh, there's something here, and I started exploring it more, the door started to open, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess my question is for prospective founders that don't know exactly what they want to do, what would you say to them? Like they know they want to start a business, but they don't know where to go, who to serve, or what really maybe they didn't know what their expertise is. A lot of people feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'd have to say that like you my advice would be to really follow something that excites you. I've had like as an example, like very early in Brooks Digital, I had what I considered to be a fairly strong, unique angle on how I could like develop service and positioning. There's a trend around a concept called green web design, right? Where it's like measuring the carbon footprint of a website. And I went, well, okay, there's a lot of eco-conscious brands that might be interested in being able to quantify, measure, and reduce the carbon footprint of their website and then be able to market that as like part of their brand.
Sure.
And which was kind of like, I was like, oh, that's a cool, interesting idea. Like, there's been some people talking about it. And I went, that's interesting to me. Like, that made a lot of business sense. But at the end of the day, I didn't find myself like passionate or excited about that. And so I was like, I would find myself sitting at my desk, like, this is a great idea. Why am I not doing anything about it? And I went like, this is like on paper, all of this is awesome, but that's not really like, I'm just not excited about this,
Yeah, you don't have the
you know?
fire for it. Yeah.
And, but I think I've found that when I latch onto an idea that it's just like, it's very easy for me to just start sitting down and I want to put in the work and I want to sit down, like, and I'm willing to jump over hoops and obstacles to be
Yeah.
able to make that happen. And I'm not waiting for stuff to be handed to me.
Hmm.
Like, I think that's so important because when you're trying to create something out of nothing, which is really what founding,
Yeah.
any sort of like a startup business, whatever is, it's like it's a lot of work to do that. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you're not like, man, I'm passionate about this idea. I really love this. And I find fulfillment in working on this, then it's going to take so long to plant the seed. Like, it's kind of like the law of sowing and reaping. That's what the way that I think about a lot of stuff in business is like, there's so much work that you have to do to sow. And then in time, you reap that. And if you're not passionate enough about an idea, or if it doesn't resonate with you deeply enough that you're like willing to be like that farmer who's just like seeding, watering, weeding with literally
Hmm.
nothing above the surface and just being like, I'm going to be here for months, just like
Doing the
putting in
same
that work.
thing every day.
Right. And then all of a sudden, like, you start to see stuff sprout and grow. Right. But the critical thing is like, if you're not all in on this certain idea and you don't find fulfillment in just that process of sowing, then most people are just going to walk away before they reap anything out of that. And so I think that would probably be my
Yeah.
number one thing is like, and in that process, just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean it's a great business idea,
Sure.
but
Right. Yeah. You
but
have
you
to
learn
check
that.
several boxes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I couldn't agree more, man, because
Yeah.
yeah, if you just don't have the fire every day to do those things, because most of entrepreneurship, what I found most of being a founder, there's a lot of boring,
Yeah.
gritty, just this sucks, man. But
Yeah.
it's weird, man, because it doesn't feel like it's boring. Like it's just like there's been times, man, where it's just like this tedious, work that I got to put together and put together our business model, or I'm putting together our outreach strategy,
Hmm.
or whatever else. And those things may be boring to other people, but I mean, I remember putting together our UX mapping, right? Like our user
Hmm.
experience map, like what that's going to look like, the user interface. And we were in that meeting that was in the very beginning, man. We were in that meeting for like 4.5 hours with my
Yeah.
dev team, and I could have gone another
Yeah.
6. Like I was
Yeah.
just in it, man. Like I was excited to be there, And anybody else looking from the outside was like, they're just in there eating like mints and on a whiteboard, because we were just in like a workspace,
Mhm.
and like a what are those things called?
The co-working
The
spaces or whatever.
co-working
Yeah.
spaces. Yeah, we were in a co-working, and so they had like the lifesavers white mints on the table, and all the food
Good
caught, and I'm
going.
just like crushing these white mints, and just talking this, and I could have been there forever. I could have been there for 3 days, dude. I just loved that, and that's to
Yeah.
me, that's because that fire, that drive, like
Yeah.
that's like this is what I want to do. I'm excited about the purpose. I'm excited about the mission, vision, what we're gonna do, who we're gonna serve, how we're gonna better. I feel like our um industrial community,
Mhm.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
or the community within the industry that we're serving. So I couldn't agree more on any of that. I do want to ask one final question before we close up.
Yeah.
I'm really appreciative of your time, man. So, Nation puts this packet together, this prep packet to understand who you are and everything, and he helps me come up with some starter questions, which is super helpful. We haven't asked any of them today, so I'm pretty actually happy about that. But there is one that I wanted to ask you, and it's how can faith-based leaders and founders balance innovation was staying focused on their spiritual and social missions?
Hmm. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure. Like, my initial reaction to that question is that those things don't necessarily have to be at odds. And what I mean by that is that, sometimes I feel like when I think about innovation, I think about people who are pushing the envelope, who are doing things that are different, who are doing things that might be like that people haven't seen before. And so I think honestly, if you're a founder who is following Jesus, who is, trying to put yourself in that mindset of like, this isn't my own kingdom, that you're going to be thinking about problems and things that in a completely different way from most other people,
Hmm.
right? So you're just going to be like you're orbiting a different, I'm just using all this my same analogies, right? I'm going to throw them all into this answer. You're like literally orbiting a different planet in a way, right?
Mm.
And so I think as a result, right, that naturally you're like the things that are going to come out of paying attention to what God is doing are going to be innovative things, right? If I think about the early church as an example, uh, that was just a radically different way of
Yeah.
showing up in the world,
Yeah.
right? Where, it's like all of a sudden they're doing quote unquote innovative things like treating all their possessions as equal, like selling land, giving money to people, like literally, there's like the
Starting
Roman Empire.
orphanages and hospitals, right?
Yeah.
Like looking at marriage as a thing to uphold and respect, right?
Yeah.
Like those were radically different in the Western world.
Yeah, 100%. And like those things now are like taken for granted, but the world, like the ripple effect of following Jesus wholeheartedly, like just turned that early world, like it just turned it upside down, right?
Yes.
And so my belief is really that like that same is true today as it was in the early church. Like if you're following Jesus wholeheartedly and like everything that you do is subservient to him, that like that you're going to make waves and those things are going to be different. They're going to be
Mm.
like innovative. People are going to notice that you're doing things in a way that isn't normal. And so I think actually
Amen to that.
if you're it's just innovation is just like an outpouring of that. It's just going to be a natural byproduct that's going to come out of you if you actually are serious and you're doing the stuff that Jesus said to do. So
I love that,
that's the
man.
best answer I got for you.
Nailed that. Yeah, I wouldn't have had any idea how to answer that question. So you knocked it out of the
Yeah.
park. That's one of my I am a nerd of early Christian history, like the early church, the first and second century.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're super familiar with that as well. And just the impact that it had on the world. And like you said, we take things for granted today, where it's like the idea that everybody's created equal, that everybody has inherent worth. That
Mhm.
was not how the world operated
Yeah.
2000 years ago, right? But anyways, you said something that, you'll make waves. And I find that so interesting because the parallel is that look at the waves that Christ made,
Yeah.
right? Like God himself entered into the world, right? His own creation as a homeless vagabond,
Mhm.
right? And changed everything. I
Yeah.
mean, people today, because they measure it through the lens of like Western Christianity and like the kind of like the modern church, right? And and the 1950s vision of the white picket fence, and yeah, and they just view it through that lens. They don't realize how radical like the
Yeah.
Christian movement was, right? They don't
Yep.
realize the thousands of Christians that were martyred for their beliefs that there was a resurrected Lord who was God, right? And is
Yeah.
God, and they forget about that radical notion, that innovation that took
Mhm.
place because of Christianity. And so I think something for us to land on here is that as a founder, in order to be successful, you have to be innovative, right? And know that you are following the most innovative path that has ever been tread, which is the way of the truth and the life, who is Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening in. A big thank you for Spencer Brooks for coming on the show, man. You're awesome, dude. And just, yeah, thank you for your time. It really means a lot.
Yeah. It was a great conversation, Jamie. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll catch y'all later.